Hey, what's up? Stephanie, the English coach here from EnglishFulltime.com. In this video, we are going to talk about how to know when you're fluent in English. And actually, you can use this little quiz, I guess, that I made to test if you're fluent in other languages as well. But basically, we're going to talk about things that happen to you and to your English when you are fluent, so you can know, hey, are you fluent or are you not fluent? What are you good at? What do you still have to work on, okay? Because if you've studied English for any length of time that's longer than, a couple months, you know that listening to English every single day does not make you fluent. Studying English for years in different English institutes does not make you fluent. Having private teachers does not make you fluent. Using English at work does not make you fluent. Even having a degree or a certificate or something, from formal higher education, a university or something like that doesn't make you fluent. I could go on and on. None of this stuff makes you fluent, right? Because you and I both know people that have done this kind of stuff and they still aren't fluent. Maybe you are even someone who's done stuff like this and you're not fluent. Okay, so it's a journey, it's a process. I'm here to help you with this, but I want to explain some of the things that happen to you when you are fluent in a foreign language. And I'm speaking from experience. Go ahead and click the link up here to watch a video where I'm speaking Spanish. You can hear how I used to speak it 7 years ago versus how I speak it today. Okay, it's completely different. Anyways, a lot happened during my journey of learning Spanish to finally becoming fluent. And the thing about fluency that makes it really hard to detect is that it does not happen overnight, right? It's not like one day you're not fluent and the next day, oh my gosh, you're fluent. It happens slowly over time, and you usually don't even realize your improvements as you're improving. You realize them when you look back at where you started and you see how far you've come. Okay, so let's talk about how to know when you're fluent. There are different things that we're going to talk about: speaking, understanding, how other people understand you, etc. Let's get into it. So you know you're fluent when you understand at least one dialect of English perfectly. You understand everything. Now, granted, there's going to be some things you don't understand. I mean, there's words in English that I don't understand. If you try to talk to me about mechanics or something like that, it's not that I'm not fluent in English. I'm just not familiar with that kind of technical jargon because I don't ever use it, right? So when you're fluent in a language, you understand everything except for the things that you're not really familiar with. Or maybe once in a while I hear a new idiom and I'm like, I've never heard that before. Or I hear a new slang term that the younger generations are using. Okay, I feel so old saying that, but seriously, I'm starting to realize how old I am because I'm hearing slang and I'm just like, oh my gosh, kids are saying that these days. Anyways, so you know you're fluent when you understand English pretty much perfectly. One dialect of English, because there are so many different dialects, you guys. I went to Ireland and I could barely understand people there. So don't feel like you need to understand every single native speaker. That's just not realistic. Okay, next, you know you're fluent when you can speak automatically without translating in your head. You don't even have to think about what you're gonna say or how you're gonna say it. You just speak. You don't worry when you're in conversations like, oh my gosh, how should I form this sentence? What verb tense should I use? You're not even having those thoughts. Those thoughts are not occurring to you because you just open your mouth and you speak and you know exactly what to say. And you know you're fluent when you make very few errors and you're able to catch your own mistakes, okay? So you pretty much sound like a native speaker. You speak the way that they speak, you make minimal errors, and when you do make errors, you're able to catch them. And if you're not sure if you can catch your errors, just write a page in English or make a video that's 2 to 3 minutes in English and then read what you wrote and watch your video and try to catch your own mistakes. If you can do it, cool, you're pretty close to fluency. Okay, next, you know you're fluent when you can use a wide range of vocabulary and expressions and you don't feel like you're repeating yourself. I remember when I was still learning Spanish, I would say the same things over and over again because I didn't know another way of expressing it. For example, I would say, qué interesante, qué interesante, qué interesante, which means how interesting, right? But I would say that for everything. You would tell me something cool and I'd say, oh, how interesting. You would tell me something interesting and I would say, oh, how interesting. You would tell me something normal and I would say, oh, how interesting. I literally did not know other ways to express my feelings and my emotions. And as you get more and more fluent, that becomes easier, expressing your ideas, expressing your emotions. You do it effortlessly, right? And you're not searching for words like, oh, how can I say this? And you don't have that annoying feeling on the inside where you're just like, man, I keep saying the same thing over and over again. I'm so tired of feeling repetitive, okay? When you're fluent, you don't have that. Okay, next, you know you're fluent when you can explain and talk about a variety of subjects that are conversational and technical. I know a lot of English learners who can explain everything about their job perfectly in English, but then when you want to talk, you know, about something totally conversational, like, hey, what'd you do yesterday? Or what'd you eat for dinner? Or what are you gonna do later today? They just freeze and they're like, you know, because that normal everyday vocabulary, they just don't have it, or they keep forgetting it, or something like that. But when you're fluent, you can talk just as easily about casual conversation type stuff as you would about your work and the technical jargon that you use there. Now, if you can't talk about what you do at work and you lack that technical jargon, then that's one thing you know you have to improve. If you do know the technical jargon of your work and you can communicate that easily in English, but you struggle with regular conversations, then you know that your focus should be on talking with people every day in English, improving that area. Okay, next, you know you're fluent when you use grammar tenses naturally and easily, and there's really no such thing as a difficult tense, right? When tenses are difficult for you, that's because you're either a beginner or you're at an intermediate stage of learning where you have not become familiarized with all the tenses and you have not been exposed to them enough to know when and how to use them, because grammar is actually something we internalize. When you're first learning it, when your teacher is first teaching you, they break it down into every little structure and they explain every scenario and situation and time and tense of how it's used, etc., etc. But eventually you internalize that and you get to a point where stuff just sounds right. You're like, I don't even remember what this grammar tense is called. I just know how to say it, and that's that. Okay, so that happens when you are fluent. Things just sound right. You know it's right because it sounds right. You might not even remember the grammar tense, and you start making the same mistakes that native speakers make. This happens to me in Spanish. I got so fluent that I started misspelling words the same way native Spanish speakers misspell words. I would confuse the B and the V, for example, which if you're a Spanish speaker, you know that that's a very common mistake. It's crazy because I used to have flawless spelling in Spanish, but that's when I was at a more intermediate level and I still had all the rules totally ingrained in my mind and I remembered everything. You could ask me anything about grammar and I knew the answer, but I couldn't speak the language. So now that I've internalized the language, I literally go through the same things that native speakers go through. And this is gonna happen to you too. This is another thing. When you get so fluent in English, there will be certain things that you will struggle to express in your native language because you just realize there's no translation. You learned it in English, you understand it in English, and then when someone from your family says, hey, explain this thing to me, you're like, I want to tell you how it is or what it is, but it just doesn't make sense unless I say it in English. You have internalized the language then. You realize that languages are just different codes of expressing ideas and some things literally can't be translated or they're very difficult to translate. This actually happened to me the other day when one of my friends asked me about mate. Mate is a typical tea in Argentina. It's a specific drink, okay, that people have there. And they wanted to know all the details, like how do you prepare this tea? How do you drink it? How do you share it? Because, you know, you pass it around and you share it with multiple people. That might sound disgusting if you're a germaphobe, but people do this all the time and it's very normal. Anyways, I was trying to explain it and my brain would not think in English. I could not explain this whole ritual in English. It was so hard. It was actually exhausting. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I wish I could explain this in Spanish because it's just so hard to say in English. Okay, so that is gonna happen to you when you get super fluent in English. You're gonna struggle to express things in your native language because certain things just don't translate well. Now, another thing that happens when you're fluent in English is that English words and grammar and sentence structures start to affect your native language, okay? You may even mess up in your native language. This happens to me sometimes frequently. I've even said things like, yeah, I shut it off the water instead of saying I shut the water off. That is a sentence structure that comes from Spanish, and that's how I would say it in Spanish. So sometimes those grammatical structures slip into my English and I just mess up. It's a really crazy phenomenon, but it happens. It's quite common. Okay, next, you know you're fluent in English when native and non-native English speakers are impressed with your English. They go, wow, you speak really well. They're shocked by your pronunciation. They're shocked by how natural you sound. And they congratulate you on it because they're really impressed. So that happens when you're fluent in English. And if it has happened to you already, congratulations. That's awesome. Next, you know you're fluent in English when you understand jokes. Understanding humor in a foreign language is one of the most difficult things because you don't just have to understand the language and the grammar, you have to understand the culture, you have to understand, the culture. That's it, basically. You have to understand why it's funny. You have to read between the lines, let's just say that. So anyhow, you know you're fluent in English when you can watch comedians and understand what they say. Now, some jokes might still go over your head, okay, but for the most part, you're surprised, like, wow, I totally understood that. I got that. And you can laugh at it and understand the humor the same way a native speaker would. Next, you know you're fluent in English when you don't get stuck when you're speaking. And if you do get stuck, you're quickly able to get around whatever is making you stuck and think of a new way to say whatever you're going to say. I get stuck when I speak English sometimes. I'm like, oh man, am I even making sense right now? Am I saying this the way I want to say it? And I realize that maybe I'm not making the most sense, so I look for a new way to say whatever I'm going to say. And when you're fluent in English, you do the same thing. You don't get stuck, first of all, on basic stuff, but then if you do get stuck with a bigger idea that you're trying to express, you just look for a new way to say it and you do the best that you can. Next, you know you're fluent when you can speak coherently for any length of time, whether that is 30 seconds, 2 minutes, or whether you're giving an entire speech in front of an auditorium of a bunch of people. What I have found after doing hours and hours and hours of lessons with English learners and talking with non-native English speakers is that when you're at an intermediate level, a lot of times you tend to talk in circles. You end up, it's like the more you talk, the less sense you make. So my tip for you here, I don't just want to leave you with this problem, is make shorter sentences and pause more between your sentences and don't try to talk for too long. If you're not sure if you're making sense and if you start saying the same thing over and over again to try to make it make sense, but you're just rambling, kind of like what I'm doing right now, then just stop. Okay, take a break. Let the other person speak in the conversation and let there be a natural flow of ideas from one person to the other. Next, you know you're fluent when you are not afraid of speaking with native speakers. Now I know that some people are shy by nature or they're naturally introverts. Even native English speakers sometimes don't want to talk with other native English speakers. They get shy when they have to do a presentation or something like that. So that's not exactly what I'm talking about because that exists and that can exist even in your native language. But I just mean you don't have those thoughts in your head like, oh my gosh, are they gonna understand me? What are they gonna think? Are they gonna make fun of me? You don't have those negative thoughts because you know that you're fluent in English. And so if you don't feel comfortable speaking with a native speaker, it's probably more related to your personality and you probably don't like doing presentations and stuff like that even in your native language. And it's not about your lack of fluency in English. Next, you know you're fluent in English when you can comfortably maintain a conversation. And maintaining a conversation means it's shared 50-50 between two people, or if there's more people, everyone is participating equally in the conversation, and you're able to exchange ideas, transition to new topics, pause appropriately, share anecdotes, tell jokes, and you just feel comfortable. You're able to maintain a conversation, and there's no like awkward silences like, okay, what should we say now? What should we talk about now? Sometimes that can happen even in your native language, maybe if you're not very good at making conversation, but for the most part, when you're fluent in a language, you should have the same conversation skills that you have in your native language. Okay, you should at least be at the same level there. Okay, I know this video is long, but we still have a few more, so hang in here with me and we'll get through this list. You know you're fluent in English when you feel like yourself, okay? When you don't feel like you're being fake, when you don't feel like you're a different person. I remember when I first went to Argentina and I had to speak Spanish for literally like the first 2 to 3 years. I was so frustrated because I was like, I just don't feel like myself. I'm not Stephanie. When I, being Stephanie, okay, what does that mean? That means that I can talk with anybody. I have no problem talking with strangers. I have no problem presenting. I like telling jokes. These are things that make up who I am. It's part of my personality. But then when I would be in Argentina, living there and being around native speakers, it was like I was a completely different person, and it was so frustrating because I didn't have the confidence to tell jokes. I lacked fluency for the first couple of years, and I was constantly stuck inside my own head thinking like, oh, nobody's gonna understand me. I couldn't relax. I couldn't enjoy the practicing process of improving the language. I just didn't feel like myself. I wasn't able to maintain conversations easily. I didn't feel comfortable talking with strangers. Finally, all of that went away, okay? And I was able to overcome all of those issues. And again, I talk about it in the video that I linked earlier where I'm speaking Spanish. So if you want to learn more about that, go watch that video. Next, you know you're fluent in English when you understand subtle differences between very similar sentences, and you're able to pick up on people's attitudes behind what they say. Like they might say one thing, but you know they really mean something else, okay? When you understand English like that, that's exactly how native English speakers are able to understand the language, and that's a whole different level, basically, of fluency. Okay, and finally, you know you're fluent in English when you avoid using direct translations, because you know that direct translations just don't work. You don't translate things directly from your native language into English because you know that native speakers don't say those things. You speak the way a native speaker speaks, and you're able to communicate ideas. So you can have an idea in your native language and then communicate that same idea in English, but you do not directly translate it word for word because, again, you know that is not how native speakers speak, so you communicate the idea the way a native speaker would communicate the idea. Okay, and I actually forgot one, so I have one more. You know you're fluent in English when your pronunciation and your accent do not interfere with your communication. Native speakers and non-native speakers are able to understand you easily. Okay, so that is it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. You should be able to go through each one of these points and analyze, hey, is this true for me or is this not true? That will help you know what you have accomplished and what you still need to work on. So I want to hear in the comments what you think of this list. What are you able to do that I mentioned, and what are you still struggling with? Okay, and did I forget anything? Is there any other weird thing or interesting thing that happens the more fluent you get in English? I know a lot of you guys are very advanced, you're fluent English speakers already, and so I want to hear from you what your journey has been like and what changes you noticed along the way, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was learning Spanish, I could really notice changes in my brain, like the way my brain was processing information and thinking. It was very interesting. And so again, I'm presenting this video to you as someone who's looking at this whole journey from the other side. I can confidently say I am a fluent Spanish speaker, and these are the things that I have noticed, analyzed, and observed about what happens when you are fluent, so that you can have some way to test yourself and know how close you are to this or how far you are from it, okay? All right, so that is it. If you want a guide on practicing your English with native speakers, meeting native English speakers online, interacting with us so you can practice your English, improve your English, learn new vocabulary, build your confidence, etc., I have a guide on my website. I'm going to link it here in the description. I always share this guide because it is literally the most popular one on my entire website, EnglishFulltime.com. I am here to help you with your confidence, your fluency in English, and your professional communication skills, your networking skills, your conversation skills. I want you to be as confident, as fluent, and as successful as possible. I do not want English to be a barrier in your life, because I know how frustrating it is to learn and master a foreign language and then work in that foreign language. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on that. We'll have to talk about that in another video. Anyhow, that's it, you guys. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.